He was not supposed to matter. A slight, sickly young man of 18, prone to fevers, easily overlooked in a Rome of giants. He had no army, no victories, no reputation, and no one who met him would have wagered a coin on his future. And yet, over the next 40 years, this fragile boy would do what no army and no assassin ever managed. He would quietly murder a republic that had stood 400 years and build in its place an empire that would endure 5 centuries. When the world was entirely his, he would die peacefully in his own bed, old, honored, worshipped as a living god. He was not Rome's strongest man, nor its boldest, only its most patient. History would remember him by a title he invented, Augustus. To understand him, you must understand the wound he was born into. Rome was a republic, and fiercely proud of it. For centuries, her citizens had sworn they would never again bow to a king. Power was divided among the Senate, the elected consuls, and the assemblies of the people, a machine built to stop any one man from owning it all. But by the 1st century before Christ, that machine was shaking itself to pieces. Rome had conquered the Mediterranean, and the glory had grown too vast for the old system to hold. Its armies no longer answered to the state. They answered to whoever paid them, whoever promised them land. Civil war followed civil war. Into that fracturing world strode one man who understood that the republic was already a corpse that had not yet stopped breathing. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar, soldier, politician, gambler of genius. He had crossed the Rubicon with his legions, shattered every rival, and made himself master of Rome. He did not bother with the old pretenses. He took the title Dictator, and then, more chilling still, Dictator for life. His face appeared on the coins, once reserved for gods and the honored dead. He forgave his enemies, which won him love, and gathered honors, which won him fear. To the men who still believed in the Republic, Caesar was the nightmare made flesh. One man above the law with no term and no equal. They watched him refuse a crown in public and did not believe it. They whispered that he meant to be king in all but name, and in Rome the word king was a sentence of death. On the 15th of March in the year 44 before Christ, they carried out that sentence. As Caesar entered the Senate, a crowd of senators pressed close around him. Men he had pardoned, men he had trusted. Then the daggers came out. More than 60 men had joined the plot, and they struck again and again. 23 wounds, until the most powerful man in the world lay dead on the marble floor at the foot of a statue. They called themselves the Liberators. They believed that by killing one man, they had killed tyranny and set Rome free. They were wrong. They had planned the murder to the last detail, and nothing for the morning after. Caesar had prepared for his death more carefully than they had. His will named an heir almost no one had heard of. The heir was a grandnephew, the grandson of Caesar's sister, a studious, unremarkable teenager named Gaius Octavius. He was across the sea in Illyria when the news reached him, his great-uncle murdered and himself adopted in the will as Caesar's son and heir to his name and fortune. In an instant, an obscure boy had inherited the most electrifying name in the Roman world. His mother and stepfather begged him to refuse it, to stay quiet and stay alive. The men who had killed one Caesar would not hesitate to kill another. He listened politely, then did the opposite. He accepted the inheritance, and with it the name Caesar, which thousands of hardened veterans loved and would follow to the death. From that day he called himself Caesar. History, to avoid confusion, calls him Octavian. Standing in his way was the most powerful man left alive in Rome, Mark Antony, Caesar's right hand, a battle-hardened general, a bull of a man beloved by the soldiers. In the vacuum after the murder, he had seized Caesar's papers, money, and authority, and he did not intend to share the future with a pale teenager. When Octavian arrived and asked for his inheritance, Antony treated him with open contempt. A boy, he said in effect, who owed everything to a name. It was the first great misjudgment made about Octavian, and not the last. For the boy did something no one expected. He began paying Caesar's veterans what they were owed out of his own pocket, reminding them whose son he now was. Loyalty drifted toward him. Quietly, without a battle, a 19-year-old was assembling a private army. Watching all of this was the old lion of the Republic, Cicero, the greatest orator Rome ever produced, the last champion of the dying free state. He hated Mark Antony above all others, feared him as the coming tyrant, the new Caesar. In young Octavian, he saw not a threat but a tool, a useful boy, respectable, with soldiers who could be flattered, armed, and pointed at Antony, then discarded once the danger had passed. The young man should be praised, Cicero told the Senate, honored and raised up. In private, he finished the phrase more coldly, praised and then lifted out of the way. Octavian noticed. He always noticed. He let the old man use him, took the Senate's honors and its legitimacy, and marched with its blessing against Antony in the north of Italy. At Mutina, in 43 before Christ, Antony was defeated and driven back across the Alps. Cicero rejoiced. He believed he had won. But both consuls who led the fight had died in the campaign, and suddenly the Senate's armies had no commander but the young Caesar. The Senate, its enemy beaten, now tried to sideline the boy exactly as Cicero had intended, passing the glory and the legions to others. Insulted, Octavian answered with the oldest argument in Roman politics. He turned his legions toward Rome and marched as Caesar and Sulla had before him. No army stood in his way. The gates opened. At 19, more than 2 decades below the legal age, he demanded and won the consulship. Its laws, he had learned, were only as strong as the soldiers behind them. And then Octavian revealed the true, cold shape of his mind. He had spent a year fighting Antony and let Cicero brand him a public menace. Now he abandoned the Senate that had used him and rode north to make peace with the man he had just defeated. On a small island in a river in northern Italy, 3 warlords met. Octavian, still not yet 20, Antony, his rival turned partner, and Lepidus, who brought legions and prestige. They divided the Roman world among themselves like men splitting an inheritance, and gave it a legal name, the Triumvirate, 3 men to set the state in order. In truth, it was a 3-man dictatorship, free to rule by decree and wage war. The Senate could only ratify what it could not resist. Their first act would drown Rome in blood. They called it proscription. In practice, it was a menu of murder. The 3 men drew up lists, the names of their enemies, their rivals, and not least, the very rich. Each posted a notice in the forum. Any man whose name appeared was stripped of the law's protection. He could be killed on sight, and whoever brought in his head would be paid from the dead man's own estate. Vengeance and profit in a single stroke. Slaves betrayed masters, sons betrayed fathers. Each triumvir traded away friends and relatives on the other's lists, as coldly as men bartering goods. Thousands died, and fortunes flowed into the war chest. Here we glimpse the other face of the boy, who would become the serene father of his nation. At 20, Octavian signed those lists. He was a cold and thorough killer. At the top of Antony's list stood the man who had thought he could use the boy and throw him aside. Cicero tried to flee. Old and exhausted, he was carried in a litter toward the coast, hoping for a ship. The soldiers overtook him near his villa. They say he stopped struggling and offered his neck to the blade. They cut off his head, and because it was his voice and his writing hand that had wounded Antony most, they cut off his hands as well. These were carried to Rome and nailed to the speaker's platform in the Forum, the very rostra from which Cicero had defended the Republic for 40 years. Octavian, who had let the old man use him, did not lift a finger to save him. The last great voice of free Rome fell silent. There remained the men who had actually killed Caesar. Brutus and Cassius, the noblest of the assassins, had fled east and raised vast armies, gathering the last hopes of the Republic. In the autumn of 42 before Christ, the triumvirs came for them. On a wide plain near Philippi in northern Greece, the armies met. One of the largest battles Romans ever fought against Romans, tens of thousands on each side. Octavian, sickly, was ill in his tent, and it was Antony's generalship that carried the day. In 2 engagements, the liberators were broken. Cassius, believing all was lost, had a servant kill him. Weeks later, Brutus, his army shattered, fell upon his own sword. The men who had murdered Caesar to save the Republic were dead, and the Republic did not rise, it was already a corpse. With their enemies destroyed, the victors carved up the world like an inheritance. Antony took the richest prize, the wealthy ancient East, the lands of Greece and Asia and Syria, glittering with golden grain. Octavian took the harder, poorer half, Italy and the West, and with it a poisoned inheritance. He had to find land for tens of thousands of discharged veterans, seizing it from Italian farmers who hated him for it, and feed cities where the grain ships no longer came. He took the thankless work that wins no songs, building among the people and the soldiers a foundation of loyalty that Antony, feasting in the East, never troubled to lay. Lepidus was squeezed to the margins and stripped of power. To seal the fragile peace, Antony married Octavian's own sister, the gracious Octavia. It would not hold. For in the East, Antony had met a queen, Cleopatra of Egypt, the last of the Ptolemies, clever, cultured, fabulously rich, ruler of the one kingdom whose grain could feed all of Rome, and mother already of a child she claimed was Julius Caesar's. Antony went to her as a Roman commander seeking Egypt's wealth for his wars. He stayed as something else. He settled in Alexandria, fathered her children, gave her Roman territories, and looked less like a Roman magistrate than an Eastern king. In time, he sent Octavia, his Roman wife, back to her brother's house. A public insult Octavian would not forget and would not waste. For while Antony built a life in Egypt, Octavian was building a story. And a story in the right hands could be deadlier than any legion Antony commanded. Here is where Octavian's true genius shows itself. He understood, as few ever have, that power is not only armies and money, it is the picture in people's minds. So he went to work on the picture. Rumor by rumor, coin by coin, he painted his rival as a drunkard in thrall to a scheming foreign queen, a man who had traded the toga for the diadem and meant to move the capital of the world to Alexandria. Some of it was true, much was shaped, sharpened, invented. Octavian was the honest Roman, defending home and gods and ancestors. Antony was the traitor gone soft in the arms of the Orient. He turned Roman opinion against a man hundreds of miles away who could not answer. Antony was no longer a Roman rival. He had been remade into a foreign threat. Then Octavian struck the finishing blow. Antony had deposited his will with the Vestal virgins in Rome. Octavian, illegally, outrageously, seized it and read it aloud to the Senate and people. Whether he read it faithfully or twisted it, we cannot know. But its contents, as he presented them, were devastating. Antony wished to be buried not in Rome, but in Alexandria, beside Cleopatra. He acknowledged her children as his own and gave them Roman territories, as though the empire were his to give away. For ordinary Romans, it was betrayal. Their general meant to hand their world to a foreign woman and her brood. And Octavian, careful as always to keep the law's mask in place, made sure Rome declared war not on Antony, a Roman, but on Cleopatra, the foreign queen. It would not be civil war. It would be Rome against Egypt. The reckoning came in the year 31 before Christ, off the western coast of Greece at Actium. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a great fleet of heavy warships crewed by the east. Against them stood Octavian's lighter, faster ships, and his boyhood friend and finest general, Marcus Agrippa. It was Agrippa who won Octavian's wars, while Octavian won the peace. Blockaded, short of supplies, their crews wasting with disease and slipping to the other side, Antony and Cleopatra's position crumbled. Then Cleopatra's squadron turned and ran for open sea, and Antony broke off and followed her. To Rome, it looked like exactly the story Octavian had told. Within the year, he came to Egypt. Antony fell upon his sword. Cleopatra, refusing to be led in chains through Rome, took her own life. Egypt, with all its grain and gold, was his. He was 32 years old and he had won. Every rival was dead. Every army in the Roman world answered to him. The treasure of Egypt flowed into his hands, enough to pay his soldiers for years. From Spain to Syria, the world was his. He had done what Caesar had done, and more thoroughly. And that was precisely the problem, the deadliest of his life. For he had seen what happened to a man who held all the power in Rome and let it show. Caesar, stabbed to death on the Senate floor for looking like a king. The Romans would give one man everything, so long as he did not seem to take it. The question was not how to seize absolute power. It was how to keep it in a state that murdered kings. His answer was the most audacious piece of political theater in history. In the year 27 before Christ, Octavian walked into the Senate and gave everything away. He announced that the civil wars were over and that he was therefore laying down his extraordinary powers and restoring the Republic to the Senate and people of Rome. It was theater, and everyone knew their part. For the Senate was full of men he had appointed, who remembered the proscriptions and feared above all another civil war. So they did exactly what he had known they would. They begged him to keep his powers. They pressed the armies, the provinces, the frontiers back into his hands, and thanked him for taking them. To adorn it, they gave him a name never before borne by a man, Augustus, the revered one. He was fanatical about the mask, and that is why it held. Where Caesar had flaunted his supremacy, Augustus hid his. He refused the crown. He refused the title of king. He even refused to be called dictator, waving the word away with a show of reluctance. He asked only to be known as princeps, the first citizen, first among equals. He dressed simply, greeted senators as colleagues, and stood for election as though an ordinary candidate. The Senate still met. Consuls were still chosen. The court still sat. To a Roman, the Republic still lived. But beneath it, one man held the reality of all power. The armies, the provinces, the money. His authority rested on what the Romans called auctoritas. Not raw command, but weight so vast his mere wish had the force of law. With his position secure, Augustus turned to the fabric of Rome itself and to shaping how he would be seen. Rome had been a shabby capital of brick and timber. He poured its new wealth into stone. He is said to have boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Temples rose or were restored by the dozen. New forums and monuments gleamed white in the sun. He built an altar to the peace he had brought and a vast mausoleum for himself and his heirs. And everywhere stood his image, statues by the thousand, always young, always calm, though the man himself aged and sickened. On coins in every hand, and in the verse of Virgil and Horace, his poets wove Rome's destiny and Augustus into one golden thread. Beneath the marble, Augustus built the quiet machinery that would actually run an empire. He took the private armies that had torn Rome apart and turned them into a professional standing force, paid, pensioned, and loyal above all to him, settled along fixed frontiers. He ordered censuses to count the empire's people and wealth. He secured the roads that bound the provinces together and the grain that kept the city of Rome fed. He gave it things it had never had: a fire brigade, a police force, an administration that functioned whoever held office. And close beside him, he stationed a new and ominous body of elite soldiers, the Praetorian Guard, the only troops permitted near the capital. From all this came the thing his name still evokes, the Pax Romana, a long, prosperous peace, resting always on one man's total control. Having remade the state, Augustus set out to remake the Roman soul. Convinced the civil wars had grown from moral decay, he passed laws to reward marriage and the bearing of children, and to punish those who stayed single or childless. He made adultery a public crime against the state. He restored crumbling temples and revived ancient rites. And in 12 before Christ, he took the highest religious office in Rome, becoming Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of the state, binding the authority of heaven to his own person. He presented himself as the model of the old Roman, modest at home, the dutiful father of the nation. It was a magnificent performance, much of it sincere, but a bitter irony was coiled inside it. The man who legislated an empire's morals would one day enforce those laws against his own daughter. For all his mastery, there was one adversary Augustus could neither outwait nor outwit: chance itself. He had no son, only a single daughter, Julia. So he searched year after year for an heir, and one by one they were taken from him. First his young nephew Marcellus, groomed for greatness, dead within 2 years. Then Agrippa, the friend who had won all his wars, married to Julia, and Agrippa died. Then his beloved grandsons, Gaius and Lucius, adopted, hoped to see them rule. And within a few years, both were dead. Death emptied his house faster than he could fill it. Julia married off again and again. He exiled to a barren island when her conduct mocked his own moral laws. In the end, he adopted the one heir he did not want, his cold stepson Tiberius. And then, near the end, came the single catastrophe that all his patience could not undo. Beyond the Rhine lay the wild forests of Germany, and Augustus meant to push the frontier to the Elbe. In the year 9 after Christ, the general Varus led 3 full legions, some 20,000 men, into the woods, trusting a native chieftain named Arminius, who had learned war and Roman service. It was a trap. In the defiles of the Teutoburg forest, where the legions could not form their lines, the German tribes fell upon the strung-out column and cut it to pieces. 3 legions were annihilated, their eagles taken, their commander dead by his own hand. When the news reached Rome, the aged emperor is said to have come apart, beating his head against the doors, crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." He lived on, patient to the last. In the summer of the year 14 after Christ, after more than 40 years as master of the Roman world, Augustus lay dying at the age of 75, worn thin by a lifetime of illness. By tradition, he gathered friends at his bedside and asked whether he had played his part well in the comedy of life. Then he died as quietly as he had lived, holding his wife Livia's hand, and the empire did not so much as tremble. The Senate declared him a god, and a witness swore he had seen his spirit rise to the heavens. Power passed without a single sword drawn to Tiberius, and in all of Rome, scarcely anyone thought to mourn the Republic. Most Romans alive had never known any world but his. That is the paradox that outlives him. He destroyed a republic 400 years old and was loved as its savior. He seized absolute power and was praised for restoring liberty. He was the cold murderer of the proscription lists who became the serene grandfather of an empire, the same man. Unlike Caesar, he was not stabbed for it. He was thanked and worshipped because he had the genius never to let Rome see what he was taking. He left behind a template of one-man rule that Europe would copy for 2,000 years. Kings called themselves Caesar, the German Kaiser, the Russian Tsar, and the month of August still carries his title across our calendars. The frail, sickly boy that nobody bet on had outweighted them all and remade the world in his own patient image.